Thursday, March 7th. It's still Thursday, March 7th, and this is episode 12 of season 2, and we're doing something a little different today. We're having a interview conversation situation with my brother-in-law and good friend Jed, who we've had many good conversations along many of the lines that Josh and I have been having, and thought that this would be interesting for everyone. So Josh, what's the plan for this conversation?
Yeah, so I like to think about the development of consciousness over time, what makes us human, what it is to be a human being. And one of the interesting things about being a human is the brains we have and how they work. And they don't always work exactly the same for everyone. And so I've mentioned a few times that I'm ADHD, I'm also dyslexic, and these are severe challenges as you move through the world. And they're also really interesting to experience the world slightly differently than everyone else. You know, I read signs differently, and I get surprising answers when I look at things. But you know, Jed and I have talked a little bit about the difficulties of living in a world that is not built for us. And I thought it would be just fun to have a conversation on what it's like trying to produce language and writing.
Hi, Jed.
Hello.
Jed's here.
I am here.
Yeah, so we've actually been having some ongoing conversations about the issues that Jed you have that we've been discussing about encoding and decoding, and your theories that language is written language is a technology. I mean, I guess that's not a theory. It's just something you've been thinking about.
Yeah, well, no, what happened was, after 30 years of, trying to write, I finally realized that maybe it's not for me. And so I went back in my mind and thought about my school experience, which I just had not really thought about that much when, for a long time, because it was, painful. So you just want to move forward. But I started to think, I was diagnosed with something when I was in 6th grade, because I'd been really struggling from the time I was in 4th grade, 3rd grade. So I started to research that, and I realized that I'd been diagnosed with something that they were then calling auditory dyslexia.
Okay.
Which is not a thing.
I don't think dyslexia is really a thing. I don't know if anyone really knows what any of this stuff is.
Well, I've been saying for a while now that I hate that term. It should be dyscodia, essentially. And that there's really a spectrum of facility with codified lexicon, because a lot of people just aren't that good at it. And it doesn't mean that you're not smart. It just means that that's not your skill.
Yeah, I mean, I was relatively late to read, but when it came to writing, I still have to say I'm not there.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's what's so weird and interesting about AI is that it really might help a lot of people. It's an autoencoder, right? It should be the fucking solution for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something I was bringing up in one of the episodes, is that I certainly would never have been able to do anything in school without spell check.
Yeah.
When I would go into the old storage rooms in the science buildings, I would find these kits for making standardized graphs. I would never have been a scientist if I didn't have programs that made graphs for me. I was never going to draw a hyperbola that anyone was ever going to, a hyperbolic function that anyone is ever going to take seriously. Yeah. Whereas I can do that in math. I can just write an equation and they'll show me the graph. And I'm wondering if AI isn't going to do that sort of next jump.
Yeah, I mean, I would figure, right? Like that's the point of it. I mean, like this idea, I've been arguing for a while that the idea that it's natural language processing or that it's a large language model is not right. That's wrong, because language is spoken. It's an event in time. It happens, something you do, and you do it with your whole body, and when you're doing it. So I've been against that, but at the same time, it's like, aren't they trying to get us to a better technology than the written word? Right? Can't we get to a point where we can just speak to the computer and it will encode for us? And that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm wondering about taking some of the transcripts that I have for the podcast and putting them through the AI, because I read the transcripts and they're not great. They're all right.
Yeah.
You can kind of figure out what's being said.
Well, it's AI that came up with these transcripts.
Right, but if I then took that and put it into ChatGPT, you would write it as a real text, and it might be something useful. I mean, and that's why.
But you'd have to work with it.
But then
but it would still be incredibly
then
helpful.
that wouldn't be a transcript.
No, it would be its own thing.
Right. It would be a document that was inspired by that conversation rather than a transcript of a conversation.
What I'm saying, that's what all written language is. It's all that.
Yes.
It's the symbolic representation of the thing, not the thing itself. The thing itself is still something different.
Yeah.
You know?
But if you read an article in the Times, it looks like everyone speaks perfectly and never has a problem with their syntax.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the way people actually speak in a real transcription,
nothing to do with it. It's totally different.
It's totally different.
This is the point that I'm making, that it's completely unnatural to remove time itself and conversation exchange from language. That's totally weird. For I don't know, you know more about this than I do, but I mean, how long have human beings been walking the face of this earth? What we call anatomically modern human beings, it's something like 100, 200,000 years, something like that.
Spot on,
So until 500 years ago, almost none of them could read and write. Right? All of us are descended from non-literate people, pre-literate people, every person on earth.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, this is it. So in order to do that, to drain the actual time and event of language from language, you have to come up with all these rules, right? You have to build a context in pure words, in pure lexicon, really. I mean, yeah, it's enhanced because you do have punctuation and everything, but still, you're really word heavy. Whereas in conversation, you point, you gesture, and you leave things unspoken because it's obvious, because everyone's observing the same phenomenon at the same time
in the same
because
space,
we're together.
Yeah.
Because the only way to speak for the 200,000 years was to be in someone's physical presence.
Yeah, no, I think it's important what you're saying from the point of view of the growth of consciousness, which I like to think about and doesn't generally get discussed. Just how fast things are moving, and that you know, we've had language itself in a written form like for maybe 5,000 years. You know, 3,000 in most cultures that were ancient, and just really not much of human history with any writing. And then for everyone to be literate, even less than 500 years.
But not everyone's literate today. And in fact, I think it's probably declining because we have new recording technologies. The crucial thing about language, about written language, about what makes it such an incredible technology is that it was the original recording technology, right? It was the original really best technology. I mean, you could make pictures of things, okay, but you see it, but it's much more dynamic than that. But now we have new recording technology.
Yeah, and there's always losses. You know, they talk about the ancient Greeks would be able to memorize everyone at a 100-person party and know all their seating arrangements and everyone's name. Because they were coming from a very early society that had writing, but barely.
But it was mostly oral.
So everything had to be memorized.
Yeah.
Homer was a tale that was told and then written down.
Yes, exactly.
And so that was how everything had been done.
Yeah, and you used meter, right?
And so our memory changed when writing came. And you know, we were just discussing a little earlier that the same thing is now happening to us. My attention span is terrible, but oh my God, since the internet, I haven't been able to read books the same way.
Well, I don't know that it's since the internet. I just think it's since the descent down the golden escalator. That's really
didn't help. But no,
the end of my concentration.
But it was as soon as I was really spending a lot of time reading nonfiction and finding my information on the internet. I mean, back even before it was, what we now think of it was more discussion groups.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of research that way, and I was leaving behind texts already. And then I think what happened with the descent down the escalator, as you put it, was I started reading newspapers every freaking day because I was terrified all the time. And since then, I've been much more engaged with the news.
That's interesting. I was brought up in a family that was engaged. My father was listening to news radio. My mother was reading the newspaper every single morning.
Yes,
without
like
fail.
that, but not like I do it now.
Yes.
See, for me, because my dad was a newspaper man,
Right.
and he would make me read all his shit all the time, and then I had to read everything he was reading, or as much as he was reading as I could,
Right.
so that I could understand what he was referring to. You know, I don't know that it changed my reading that much, although it is true that I haven't read a novel in a lot of years.
Well,
but I was always reading, and the thing is, if you have experience growing up with newspaper people, you will know that everything's supposed to be in the first paragraph,
Right?
Because that's all anyone reads. My father used to always admonish me: don't bury the lead. If you have something to say, you say it up front.
Yeah, that
You
is
don't
not
wait.
my ability.
Yeah.
I mostly, I think because of the world of academia, I'm used to building a long argument and then coming up with an answer at the end, and that's totally wrong.
This is what I'm saying. Like, that is entirely different to how we converse. You have to build all this context.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do that in conversation.
Right.
And it's just your brain can work much faster in conversation, actually. And translating that to the page where you don't have all these tools. And one of the tools especially is each other.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
Because
we
we're
can
helping
change
each other.
We can change the topic
Yeah.
with no warning, and then
Yeah.
come right back with no warning.
Yeah,
and if
and-
you're
and
reading that,
it
it's
won't-
completely disconcerting.
Yeah, it freaks you out.
I mean,
So-
I have to say, I loved If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, but the first time I hit that change up, I'm like, I was back and forth about what's going on here.
Yeah.
And it's like, in reading, it doesn't work, but in conversation, we could
Yeah.
just completely change the topic.
But I think that's part of why I like Calvino, and I can read Calvino.
Well,
'Cause
yes.
he's sort of acknowledging that the actuality is totally different.
Entirely. But
Yeah.
the first time I hit that, I was completely
flummoxed, yeah.
confused.
Yeah.
Did they paste two books together in the
No,
middle?
And
What?
that's the thing. It's like if you think of literacy as standardized language, which is what it is, right? But we're all actually schooled somewhat differently. Like I grew up reading newspapers, but also novels, because I had novels in my house also, and I happened to be into that. But a lot of people, especially seems like nowadays, we've been overrun with nonfiction and essayism, as I like to call it. And I don't respond to that as well.
Right.
It just doesn't resonate with me as well. I've never been able to get through Plato. I just couldn't do it. I'm just lose interest, and I don't care, because I feel like it's just this pure sort of abstraction.
Yeah.
And I stop believing in its veracity. I stop thinking that.
Well, I can get through that, but what I've always wanted was a world of much more of spoken language and much less writing, because it's always been my advantage. I'm much better verbally. It's why I'm doing a podcast is I would argue with my teachers. They say, why can't we do all of our tests orally?
Yeah.
Why can't we do everything? None of this needs to be written down. And they explained to me that everything had to be written down because, one, it's the only way anything's preserved, which is now no longer true.
Yeah.
And two, because it's a much faster way to access the material. And I bought that one for a long time, that the only way to get information into your brain that fast is reading. I watch my kids and my students watching YouTube at 2x speed, and it's like words so fast I can't even hear them.
Yeah.
So they're actually upping the input rate.
But they're getting it. You can't hear it, but they can.
If I really pay attention, I'm really concentrating. But for them, it's easy.
But they're
but
not
they grew up on
focused
it.
like but they grew up.
They
on
grew
it.
up with it. Yeah, no, they're training their brain the way I train mine to read. I didn't
Yeah.
start reading faster than I can speak. I
Something-
learned how to do it.
Something that I think is very interesting, though, which is one of the things that Jed and I have been talking about repeatedly, and I think might touch on a more recent concept of evolution, is that in order for what Jed has been talking about, this technology of literacy to really take hold and to grow with us the way we need to be experts in it, is that it needs to be with us generationally. That the families that have had literacy in the family over multiple generations have distinct advantages, and this is a fascinating thing that Jed's been talking about, that I think aligns to a great extent with a lot of the things we've been talking about, with also the discussion we had with AI and how AI is changing the way that we're writing changes the way that we think.
Yeah.
What does all this mean when we bring it all together?
And I also gets really weird when we're in this state of complete flux. I mean, we had the written word for hundreds of years, but that was all there was, right? Now we have new technologies in, and how does that affect us through generations? Like, isn't it going to be more difficult as we go forward for literate people using the old technology to communicate with people who actually may not read that well, but they don't have to because they watch videos?
Basically, yes. They will have their information read to them.
Yeah.
And they will have their papers written for them, more or less. When my students used to write, they were not great all the time.
Yeah.
Particularly if English was a second language, and it was a new syntax that they were working with.
Yeah.
And you would get a sort of word salad a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And then they would put them through these primitive programs that would try and fix it, and it just made it worse.
Yeah.
And it would just be even more word salad. But starting about last year, suddenly the papers got really good. And at first I thought it was all AI just writing for them. And I put it through the detectors, and they came out as 60% human. And
Oh, wow.
I think that's actually honestly what they are.
Yeah.
What they're taking their bad papers, running it through Grammarly, and it's fixing all of the syntax, and it comes out well.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is then when I read their papers that they have, or their tests they have to write in class, they can't use Grammarly, it seems a little better. It seems like they're actually learning the grammar, somewhat like even you and I who can't spell, for example, learned a little bit of spelling because spell check keeps putting a red line under everything that we spell wrong the same way.
Yeah.
I even now know the words
definitely.
that it's going to fix for me.
Yeah.
And I know which ones it's going to fix for me.
Yeah.
So I don't worry about the spelling. It's like I've learned in that way.
Yes.
Like there's the ones that it
good.
always puts a red line on that I have to be careful with.
Yeah.
And there's the ones that it won't and I have to be careful with because because it's the right word, but the wrong version of it.
Yeah.
And there's the ones that I just don't care anymore and I just throw my fingers at the screen and suddenly it's got a word.
But that's a good thing. That's all a really
Absolutely,
good thing.
yeah.
Because it's not that people are struggling to understand or even to particularly articulate their thoughts. It's just getting on the page.
Yeah.
Because there's all these rules to it, and there's so many norms, and you really need to follow them. They're important on the page. They're important.
Yeah.
In conversation, they don't matter at all.
Right.
You just throw them out the window.
But there's this science fiction trope of a civilization getting to the point where it knows nothing about its machines and it can't fix its machines until it doesn't have the machines anymore. And the cycle that we're talking about here of literacy actually changing our brains, like the technology of writing changes our brains so that we can use it better. And now the AI is actively working to change the way we write.
It's going to become more standardized.
Which is going to work its way into our heads even
and
more.
our conversation.
Yeah.
And suddenly we are now in coevolution with this technology that we've created that is dragging us in a completely different direction.
Well,
we've got a ways before we figure out what we're going to do with it.
Or what direction that is. But that's what you guys are describing.
Yes.
I'm still working on this idea, but I'll throw it out there that if you think of the Bible as a technology, because it is.
Yeah.
Right? We've been doing that all along. We just decided that it was sacred, right? And so what the Bible says, that's just a technology. It's basically AI. If you think
you mean
as
in like rules to live by? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. We sit around. How much of our society's effort is made at interpreting text?
Quite a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot depends on the interpretation of ancient texts that were written in a totally different context than what we exist in now.
Yeah.
Right? But because that technology at the time of its birth was so powerful, right? Okay, they were wrong about how many cubits the fucking altar has to be, but they were still closer, right?
Yeah.
And, it was still a much better guess than they had before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they could, the priests in Egypt could tell you very close to when the Nile was gonna
they knew
flood.
Yeah.
They were very close. It wasn't perfect, but it was way better than anybody had. So that's gonna come off as God to you, and that's what happened. It became God. Like the text itself
Yeah.
became God.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
there's
then
a lot
just
of
listen to it.
there's a lot of commonalities of successful cultures being in favor of not murdering each other and you
Yeah.
know sharing because
Yeah.
otherwise everyone starves to death. And then being really mean to the outside cultures.
Yeah.
And that those things are both, you know, built in. And I think they're built in for sort of the way humans work as you know, groups competing on the Serengeti.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of these texts are sort of codifying for society, you know, don't kill, be really nice to each other, and you shall have no other God than me. Like, don't read any other texts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so texts that survive are the ones that reinforce themselves.
Yeah.
The ones that didn't survive, like the Essenes, might have said, let's everyone be celibate too. That didn't work out, you know.
work out.
There's
Yeah.
a certain
But-
evolution of
but-
our culture itself.
But originally, text would have been in competition with not text.
Right, yeah,
religion, right? With pretextual religions, right?
Right. Oral
Which are
history,
based-
song, yeah.
But
yeah.
are based on goddess experience.
Yeah.
You go
Yes.
you party all night until you fucking see God. That's God.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
you'll know that spring is coming and the animals are coming, but the people who actually write stuff down will know to the day.
to the day.
when, you know, when the sun is coming up in this
Exactly.
spot over the
And it
mountain right
seems-
there.
And it seems like magic, like they're
Yeah,
in touch with
yeah.
God,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because they
Well,
know
now,
what's
of
going to
course-
happen.
Now, of course, you bring Isaac Asimov to mind.
Yeah.
You know.
But
But,
yeah,
yeah.
the AI is starting to be like that in that it is essentially making us idolatrous because you're right,
Yeah.
it isn't intelligent.
No,
It's nothing like an intelligence.
it's nothing like
but
us
it's
at all.
really hard not to say, you know, please AI, tell me this answer instead of just saying tell me.
Yeah.
Thank you AI.
Yeah, I know, and
That's idolatrous.
But the impulse to create it in the first place, to me, is religious in our sense of religion, because it posits that the code is just as good as the non-code.
Mm.
You know, like it's still a praise of code itself,
Yeah.
and to me, that's an issue. You know, because ultimately, it's our wits in real time that are important.
Well, it reminds me of the arguments I would have with my teachers saying, you
Yeah.
know, why isn't speaking the most important thing? It's what we do
Yeah.
what we do most of the time.
It is.
If you don't know something and you have to look it up, you don't really know it. It needs to be in your brain. You need to be able to talk about it right away.
Yeah.
It's what my son argues with his teachers about.
Yeah.
You know, he says, "Oh, I could just watch YouTube. The way you
Yeah.
teach me with these textbooks doesn't make any sense to
Doesn't
me,
make it
and
doesn't
actually isn't as good as what I see on YouTube."
Yeah.
And he sits there and watches YouTube at 2 times speed and can watch really in-depth things. He's learning a ton of history, a ton of physics, great, you know, nature channels, really in-depth information without the pain of the textbook. But it will never be acknowledged. And that's another thing I wanted to mention to you is like how little credit we get for all the work we do.
Yeah, and that's what's scary and crazy about what's happening right now, because the written word isn't acknowledged generally as a technology, really. People don't really think of it that way. We're now still teaching to the written word. And is that the right thing to do? Shouldn't we be moving on? Shouldn't we be insisting that AI actually is in all classrooms, because that's the tool that people are going to use, and the more that they know how to use it, the better the more they'll excel at it. I mean, because that's been the dividing line in history, right? The non-literate get fucked. They just
at my faculty meetings, they literally like, Josh, don't tell the students about AI. I'm like, oh, they so know.
No.
They already know.
Don't tell them.
Yeah,
They knew before you did.
I'm suggesting we use it in our classes to actually, if you want to write a paper, have the AI write you the paper, and then figure out how to make that real.
Yeah.
And not just what the AI wrote.
Yeah.
I was voted down on that one.
I'm sure, but that's what I'm saying. People are so invested in the written word, you know, and they don't see it as a technology, and it is holy. I mean, that it is the essence of our modern religions. They're all Abrahamic, right? And at least here in America, it's all text-based. That couldn't have been true a mere few thousand years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just not even possible that was true. But we had more religion then. Atheism itself was totally unimaginable in a situation where you only have speech, because you really don't know what the fuck's going on in the world.
No, religion was basically science. It was your story that you told about where everything came from, how everything worked, how you were born,
that's what I'm saying.
where you went when you died.
The Bible is, in essence, proto-science. It's just science before there's real good data, right? So they're saying the altar has to be so many cubits high. This you grab this goat and not the other goat for sacrifices.
Yeah.
They were trying to reason it out. It was misguided and insane, of course, but they didn't know that at the time. They're still trying to figure it out, and it was an attempt at science. They're trying to do it right, and like I said, it's such a powerful technology overall, and it gives you such a tremendous advantage over people that don't have it, that it's going to come off as God. That makes sense. I mean, it's
with a really high prescription on you must read this one book and you really shouldn't read the others.
Yes, yes, but again, it's to establish, like certainly in Judaism, right? It's to establish it in the family, because Judaism essentially is a family, right? Before it's a religion. That you can be Jewish and not practice Judaism, but you're still Jewish, and that's what happened, right? In Judaism embraced literacy completely, and that didn't happen in the Catholic Church, right? They really privatized the written word. Most civilizations seem to want to privatize it, right? Because people don't want to share the knowledge.
Let's say it in Latin.
Yeah. I mean, the law itself in our fucking world today does that on purpose.
Dozens of Latin words still.
Yeah. And they try to import dead words from dead languages, so you have to get a fucking degree. And then they can talk to each other about things and you don't understand and it gives them a tremendous advantage, right?
Yeah.
So, but that didn't happen in Judaism exactly. Like the only reason why there's illiteracy or less functional literacy in Judaism is because simply people were in circumstances where they didn't have enough time and money and resources to educate their children for years, They just didn't have that opportunity. But it's always been looked up to, whereas there's resistance a lot of time for people to transform into literate people. There's real resistance, in part because that you're abandoning your own culture.
It's a complete separation. If you come from an illiterate family and you become literate, you're separating yourself from your family.
You're a different person. You're separating. So
and I'm definitely seeing that in my classroom. That I'm seeing people whose grandparents are absolutely from the old culture, whatever that is. Native Americas, Afghan tribes. Like really very much old cultures where no one has ever been literate. And certainly not women.
No, definitely not women. And that's what I'm saying. It's really the most divisive technology in history, actually, and
well, we've got some new ones.
We have some new ones,
and they're going to be, I think, equally as divisive in some ways.
That was my initial fear when I first heard of AI, because I didn't know shit about AI. I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about computers really. But when I first heard about it a year ago, the first things I thought of was, this is a way to re-privatize written language, in essence.
Interesting,
right?
yeah.
Because to me, I think it's probable that the worst time to be a human was before the printing press, but after, literacy. Like to live somewhere where you were not literate and other people were.
Oh yeah, the 1% of the monks. And
that was not a good time. It wasn't until the benefits of literacy, which are obviously many, but they weren't really benefits to the many until the many could read and write.
Right. That's a very good point.
So, and then this is a way to go back, because it's always tempting for the elites to want to
keep the good stuff to themselves. We can't have nice things.
And the funny thing is that there's still this push to to call it heredity, right? That it's genetic in basis, but you wouldn't know how to read it unless you were taught.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I'm interested in about is how fast the pace of change is now, how we can't possibly keep up with it genetically, but how we're still adapting culturally. But I think physiological change, just like you can get bigger muscles. In response to something, I think our brains are changing in response to these.
Definitely, but I mean, aren't we always really plastic in the brain?
Yes, and that's a good thing, and that's why we can quickly adapt new technologies and have in the past many times, and they suddenly will change whole civilizations.
And which is, I think, why
Yeah.
we're looking at this thinking, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, this could happen now, because
Yeah.
this is like
Yeah.
the printing
Yeah,
press
there's this
all over again.
story of the Rites of Spring. You know, the first time he
Yeah.
played it, there were riots.
Oh,
A year later, he was carried out on people's backs as a hero because they got it.
They got it,
and some people think that people's brains sort of adapted in that year,
Yeah.
which I don't even understand because it wasn't even recorded.
No.
And
No.
most of the audience would have had to just
No.
heard about it.
No, yeah.
But the first time it was just so much of a shock
That
that they couldn't handle it. And then the second time they're like, "Oh, this is the best thing ever."
Okay, yeah.
So our ability to adapt even when we aren't directly encountering the thing is profound.
But this is what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't get to the genetic level, right? Like, there's still nobody who, if you don't expose them to literacy, would learn to read. Like, if I took the infant child of a sixth generation professor,
right? No, they're
right?
not going to learn to read.
And fucking put them in the Orinoco or something, with a traditional tribe, they wouldn't know how to read. They know language. They know how to speak.
Maybe, yeah. There's been some thoughts on that.
Well,
no,
if they were interesting,
if they were in a, if
they were with people, yes. If they were with people,
if they got saved by a tribe,
the Orinoco, got it, yes,
right?
got it, yes.
If they got saved by a tribe, they would learn the tribal language,
right?
Like communication is something we do.
Yeah,
and languages and written language is something we learn. So that's definitely.
Yeah.
I think we should wrap it up here. But Jed, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I hope that you will come back for more.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks. Until next time.